Hanukkah, otherwise known as the Festival of Lights, recalls the victory more than 2,000 years ago of a militarily weak but spiritually strong Jewish people over the mighty forces of a ruthless enemy that had overrun the Holy Land of Israel and threatened to engulf the land and its people in darkness. The miraculous conquest, culminating with the rededication of the sanctuary in Jerusalem and the rekindling of the menorah, which had been desecrated and extinguished by the enemy, has been celebrated annually ever since, serving as a message of the triumph of freedom over oppression, of spirit over matter, of light over darkness. The Chanukkah lights are in fact the first lesson in religious freedom. The lights stood as the first beacon against the forces of religious bigotry and persecution. The flames above the candles inspire those who cherish freedom of the spirit in a land of precious liberty. This is a very timely and reassuring message, for we live in a day and age where darkness prevails in the form of insidious erosion of time-honored values and principles that are the foundation of any decent human society. The Chanukkah lights remind us in a most obvious way that we must brighten our lives with the glorious glow of spiritual illumination. We must seek to dispel whatever murky shadows and fill the void with rich and vibrant meaning and purpose. The lights serve as a vivid reminder of how, irrespective of the constant threat of corruption of basic moral ideals, the Jewish spark will always prevail as its penetrating light permeates all corners of the religious spectrum. Fire seems to have this drawing power, causing one to become transfixed when gazing into the naked flame. And yet after a while, one cannot help but notice the flame waning as its light dims and its warmth diminishes. Still comes the next day and the same light is rekindled with yet another light added. Just as we thought the light is extinguished and darkness seems to creep in, we're back with an even greater intensity of light, magnifying the brightness, increasing the warmth, and enhancing the illumination. As we gaze into the Chanukkah lights, we think of the past and we look to the future. We reflect upon the flames as they mirror the Jewish spark that burns brightly within each of us. The Chanukkah lights remind us in the most obvious way that illumination begins at home with oneself and one's family by increasing and intensifying the light of spiritual development in the everyday experience, just as the Chanukkah lights are kindled in growing numbers from day to day. But though it begins at home with oneself and one's loved ones, it doesn't end there. The nature of light is such that when one kindles for oneself, it tends to benefit all others who are within the vicinity as well. Our responsibility extends to bringing light to those who, for one reason or another, still walk in darkness. We must seek to take the message of Hanukkah on board and internalize the words of our sages, "A little light dispels a lot of darkness." To go out and illuminate our surrounds by cultivating the dynamism and vibrancy that Judaism has to offer, thereby making Hanukkah an event of the present, a modern-day miracle. A young man named Avraham Greenbaum lost his entire family in the Holocaust. After the war, he came to America and he really didn't want anything to do with Judaism. He changed his name to Aaron Green, moved to Alabama where there were very few Jews. He got married, had children. The day his oldest daughter, Rachel, turned 12, they were not going to celebrate her bat mitzvah. Instead, Aaron decided to take Rachel to the mall and buy her anything she wanted there. When they went into a big electronics store and were browsing, Rachel's eye suddenly caught something in an antique shop across the way. She was mesmerized. She couldn't take her eyes off what she had seen. She told her father, "I don't want anything from the electronics store. I want to go across to the antique shop." When they got there, the girl pointed to an old menorah and said, "That's what I want." Her father couldn't believe it. He was offering her to purchase anything she wanted from the whole mall, and this is what she was choosing. He tried to talk her out of it, but couldn't. Aaron asked the shop owner the price of the menorah, and to his surprise, the man replied, "Sorry, that's not for sale." Aaron says, "What do you mean? This is a store." He offered a lot of money for it. Again, the owner refused, this time explaining, "I found out the history of this menorah. A man built it during the war, and it took him months to gather the wood. It survived, but he didn't. It's going to be a collector's item. It's not for sale." Meanwhile, Rachel kept telling her father, "That's what I want. All I want is that menorah." So Aaron Green kept offering more money until the owner finally agreed to sell. Rachel was so excited, she took the menorah home, up to her room, and played with it every day. One day, the parents heard a crash from Rachel's room. They ran upstairs and saw the menorah shattered to pieces. The father got really angry at his daughter and admonished her for being so careless, especially as he had paid so much money for it. But later, Aaron felt bad about his reaction. He went to Rachel and he said, "You know what? Let's try to glue it back together." And then whilst holding one of the pieces, he noticed a piece of paper wedged inside. He pulled it out and he started to read. Tears welled up in his eyes, and soon after, he fainted. His family revived him. "What happened?" And he replied, "Let me read you what I found. It's written in Yiddish, so I'll translate. To whomever finds this menorah, I want you to know that I constructed it, not knowing if it would ever have the opportunity to be lit. Who knows if we will live till Hanukkah to see it being kindled. In all probability, going through this war, I will not. But if Providence brings this menorah to your hands and you find this letter, promise me that you will light it for me, for us, for my family, and for all those who gave their lives as proud Jews." Aaron Green then looked up at his family, and in a choked-up voice with tears welling in his eyes, he said, "The letter is signed by my father." Even as some might wander in darkness, the Chanukkah lights have a way of miraculously brightening our path, opening our eyes and enabling us to find our way back. That's been the truth and the reality of our tumultuous history. Whether pogroms, crusades, the Inquisition, and the Holocaust, there were those who constantly sought to obliterate us. But even as we hit our lowest point, the darkest moment of night is just before the dawn. Somehow we always find our way back. We rebuild and we thrive once more. Consider the very places that served as the epicenter of Jewish persecution, whether in Russia, Germany, Hungary, the Ukraine. And look at the giant menorahs today that stand tall before the Kremlin, at the Berlin Wall, and whichever other place besides. The Hanukkah lights remind us that no Jew will be left behind, and we will always find our way home. Inasmuch as we light our candles to remember the miracle of the menorah in the Hanukkah story, Jewish law stipulates that we light it from when the sun starts to set. Now, this is in direct contrast to the way the original candles were lit on the menorah in the temple, specifically by day. Furthermore, in the temple, all the candles were lit each time, whilst we add another candle every night. Why the discrepancy? Well, what is a candle? You are a candle. Think about it. A candle is a ball of wax with a fire burning at the top. You are a body, and your soul is the fire at the top. The soul of man is the fire of God, says the verse. Some candles burn bright, while others wax and wane at risk of being blown out. Some people, their souls are on fire. They shine bright. They are like the sun in the middle of the day. Other people, their souls may be switched off for one reason or another. They walk in darkness. They're like the thick black in the middle of the night. Think about planets. Mercury is very hot because it is so close to the sun. Pluto is very cold because it is so far from the sun. There may be those who are Mercury Jews, always so close to God, so switched on, always so hot and passionate about their faith. Like the planet, they are close to the essence of light, so their lives shine bright and radiant with spiritual luminescence. And then there are Pluto Jews, those who stumble, who struggle, who grapple with coldness and apathy in their Jewish lives. They're so far from the light, they find themselves at a distance, hence they walk in darkness. For the most part, most Jews are neither Mercury nor Pluto. We walk planet Earth, somewhere in between. We have both hot and cold moments as part of our living reality. We are neither bright as day nor dark as night. In fact, we're much like the sunset, not always shining bright, not necessarily walking in darkness. We are fluctuating Jews, navigating both experiences. I look at the Hanukkah candle and I see myself, a body and a soul. I'm lighting specifically at sunset, and I recognize the reality that I am a sunset Jew, this struggle between light and dark. But in those darker moments, during those times of struggle, how do I get myself to shine a little brighter? How do I fire up my soul? Consider the reality that these candles are lit purposefully in increasing order. If I want to light up my life, I have to add a little light every day. I don't light them all at once. I'm not at that level. Just a little bit of light, one good deed, daily gestures that add meaning and splendor into my existence. That's the essence of Judaism in our world today. It's not about quantum leaps. It's about baby steps. It's not about going from 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. It's about growing gradually and resolutely. It's not about big bursts of light, lighting all candles at once. It's about adding another flame day by day. In temple times, Jewish life was bright as day, so the menorah was lit by day. Everyone was engaged, involved, enthused, energized. Jewish life was all about lighting all candles at once. But today it's altogether different. 2,000 years of trial and tribulation, the pervading darkness overwhelms. But we light the Hanukkah candles to remind us not to despair. We may vacillate between extremes in our lives. We may be sunset Jews. We may indeed struggle with darkness. But don't let that define you. Don't give up on yourself. You're more than just a ball of wax. You have a spark within as well, and it's waiting to be unleashed. The starting point, light a candle today. Do something meaningful, however trivial you perceive it to be. And then tomorrow, do it again and add something more. That's the way we light up our lives. That's the way we light up our world. That's the way we will merit, as in the days of Hanukkah, to be able to light the ultimate menorah once more, forevermore. Even as we talk about celebrating Hanukkah, what is it that we're really celebrating? Of course, there is the miracle of the small band of Jewish warriors that defeated a far greater Assyrian Greek army. There's also the well-known miracle of how they found a small bottle of oil that should have lasted for one day, but actually burned for so much longer. But perhaps greater than the miracle of a small group of men defeating a large army, and perhaps even more miraculous than finding a small bottle of oil with a seal that burned so much longer than it should have, is the simple fact that they had the faith and the conviction to go and search for such a bottle amidst the ruins in the first place. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not manna from heaven or splitting seas, but within ourselves, and more precisely within our convictions. There was a woman who spoke some years ago at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City for the Society for the Prevention of Blindness. And she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I went blind at a young age. I couldn't see. Nonetheless, I went on to achieve my doctorate in psychology, and I launched a successful career. I went on to get married. I had 4 children. Then I heard of a doctor from Italy who had devised a surgical procedure to restore vision in certain cases and determined that I was a candidate. I sent in my file and he took up my case. I hesitated at first, but one close colleague said to me, if you were able to accomplish so much in your blindness, imagine how much more you can accomplish once your eyesight is restored. You'll become a powerhouse." And she said to her audience, as you all know, I had the surgery done and I can now see. What you may not know, however, is that within 4 years, I became depressed. I became estranged from my family. I lost my job. And she said, why? What happened? What changed? And then she explained very simply and yet powerfully, because when I was living in the darkness, I always was looking for the light. But I didn't know how to live in that light. That's been our biggest problem as a people and even as individuals. Adam and Eve were living in the light of paradise, but they soon get expelled because they didn't know how to live in the light. When the Jews were in the darkness of Egypt, they were crying out for redemption, looking for the light. As soon as they are freed, living in the light, they make a golden calf. They complain continuously. They didn't know how to live in the light. And in the Hanukkah story, we were in darkness looking for that bottle of oil. The menorah then burnt in the temple for some 235 or so years, but we didn't know how to live in the light. The temple was destroyed. The Jews were exiled, and we have been struggling to one extent or another ever since. There's a light that burns bright inside each and every single one of us. Inside this light are our greatest potentials. But how often do we go looking for this light? And even when sometimes we do tap into it, how long do we actually live in this light? Or to put the question another way, how much do we really believe in ourselves and in our God-given ability to achieve greatness? You have to believe in yourself. You need to be aware of your abilities in order to best nurture them and apply them to your life's plan and model. there were these two seeds that were lying side by side in the beautiful spring soil. The first seed said, I want to grow. I want to send my roots deep into the ground and beneath me and thrust my sprouts through the earth's crust above me. And so she grew. The second seed said, I'm afraid. If I send my roots into the ground below, I don't know what I'll encounter in the dark. If I push my way through the hard soil above me, I may damage my delicate sprouts. What if a snail tries to attack my buds? What if a small child is to pull me from the ground? No, I choose to wait till it is safe. And so she waited. A little chicken came wandering along in the garden looking for food and found the seed that chose to wait and immediately ate it. And the moral of the story is, if you refuse to risk in order to grow, you will get swallowed up by life. As you gaze at the beautiful Hanukkah flames flickering, ask yourself, which seed am I? The one stuck in the dark ground, not realizing my fullest potential? Or the one that has broken through and discovered the light? We all have greatness within us. We all contain something special. We need to sometimes stand back and look in order to capture a glimpse of a larger vision of ourselves. We must then look to discover who we really are, our uniqueness, and what it is we bring to the world. Understand that, like in the Chanukkah story, each of us is a miracle of light in our own right, and determine how to live in that light. There was a young woman in Israel who endured the pain of many infertile years, praying daily and yearning constantly for the precious moment of motherhood. Her own mother was upset that she never had the chance to become a grandmother prior to her passing. After 15 anxious years and some advanced fertility treatment, she was overjoyed to experience the deep-seated emotion as unique to an expectant mother. But it was the news which the doctor gave next that provided the real shock to the system. On account of her treatment, she had 5 viable fetuses inside her. Indeed, several months later, she gave birth to quintuplets. The delight of an instant family was immense, but the pressure and the financial strain couldn't be readily ignored. And yet still, the benevolence typical to Jewish people, and especially in close-knit communities and neighborhoods, ensured that meals were brought in, hand-me-down clothes and other necessities were provided. Everyone in the shchunah, in the neighborhood, happily offered whatever help they could, sharing in the thrill of this miracle. There was one particular woman from a neighboring community who sent in a check once a month. It wasn't a large amount, but it still provided much needed relief to the newly struggling family. And this young mother, she wanted to personally acknowledge and thank this woman, and so she got in touch and invited her to come visit herself and her brood. It was a sweet, elderly woman who was greeted at the door. Her face was seamed but still radiant, and her effervescent smile belied tears that had long since dried. She came into the modest apartment, was given a cup of tea and some cake, and these 2 generations forged an immediate kinship. And then at one point, the elderly woman was invited to come into the adjacent room to view some family photos, and then she fainted. Hatzalah, the emergency services were called, and she was soon revived. She refused to leave to the hospital and sat once again with the young mother. That picture on the wall, who is that? And the young woman replied, that's my mother as a young girl. Why? The elderly woman went on, I lost much of my family in the war, which is why I wanted to do my bit in helping another new family into this world. I had been consigned with 4 other girls to a particular barracks. We were not really religious, but it was the festival of Hanukkah, and we wanted to celebrate as we always did. We melted butter for oil. Threads from our rags were going to be used for wicks, and all we needed was to steal a few potato peels to serve as the menorah. We stole into the darkness of night to steal some potato peels from the garbage heap, but we were caught, questioned, harassed, and duly informed that we would be executed in the morning when the commandant was awake. There was one girl in the camp who was treated differently. She was multilingual, and the Germans used her to help translate radio broadcasts, especially as it was nearing the end of the war and they wanted to keep up with what was going on out there. We immediately realized our plight, and we knew that if anyone can help, however tiny that smidgen of hope, it was her. Maybe she could talk to someone, ask them to spare us. We came to her. We talked to her and she told us, "Go away or you'll have me killed with you. Leave me alone." We pleaded with her. We cried, all to no avail. The next morning, the 5 of us were summoned from the barracks and were being led to our death. And then, as we were standing there awaiting our imminent fate, that girl came charging out into the muddy grounds, running up to the commandant and babbling away something to him, something about the Allied forces coming. He immediately releases us, screaming, chasing us away in rage and disgust, and goes running off himself. Until this day, we don't know exactly what it was that she said, nor do we ever have an opportunity to properly thank her. "That girl," said the old lady, the long-lost tears now back and streaming down her face. "That girl," she repeated, and then pointing to the picture, "that's the girl who saved our lives." And now it was the young mother's turn to become visibly shaken with emotion. She's trembling from head to toe, not just because she'd never been told about this heroic feat by her mother, not just because of the so-called coincidence, but because, as she explained, the night before I went into labor, I had a restless sleep. And then I saw my mother in my dream, clear, vivid, just as I remembered her before she passed on only a year before. She looked to me and she said, "5 for 5. I said, "Mama, what do you mean?" And she repeated, "5 for 5. And then I woke up. It meant nothing to me, nothing at all until now. Most of us can't begin to imagine the enormity of the risk and the incredible self-sacrifice that so many made in the camps just to be able to sustain their traditions, to kindle a makeshift menorah, to bring a little light into what was the darkest place on earth. Consider our tumultuous history, where there were pogroms, crusades, the Inquisition, and the Holocaust. There were those who constantly sought to obliterate us. But just as the darkest point of night is before the dawn, so too the brave and the faithful will always summon the strength and realize that the apparent darkness is just a prelude to an even greater light and illumination. The uniqueness of the 5th night of Hanukkah is that tonight is the first night that there is more light, more candles lit than not. It signifies the reality that good will always triumph over evil, that darkness will always prevail over light, and that all of our efforts, whether sacrifices we are prepared to make big or small, they'll always be repaid. It'll always come back on us in glorious ways, even generations later. Nothing is for nothing. 5 for 5. One of the famous rituals associated with Hanukkah is that of gift giving. To be sure, the original tradition was giving Hanukkah geld, or money. The exact origin of this custom is uncertain, but it is practiced and certainly cherished, particularly by the recipients. The significance of the custom relates to the fact that the real battle of Hanukkah was a cultural one. The Greeks sought to assimilate us and inculcate us with Greek culture and philosophy. They sought to enforce Hellenism at the expense of Jewish ideals and education. Those that were most under threat were the Jewish children. It was they, more than any other, whom the Greeks wanted to influence with all sorts of alien ideas. Hence, they banned all means of Jewish education. A little-known fact is that in response to that threat, following the victory of the Maccabees in the Hanukkah story, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Gamla established a national network of Jewish studies and set into motion a Jewish educational system which we benefit from till present day. Indeed, Hanukkah contains the root word chinuch, which means education. We look to encourage our kids today to study their ancient traditions and incentivize them with Hanukkah money, or as a substitute for Hanukkah money, we may give them gifts. Indeed, Maimonides discusses the importance of using incentives and prizes until a child is old enough to understand the importance and beauty of Jewish values and rituals, and that's what we do. Take a moment and ask yourself, what is the greatest gift you recall a loved one leaving you? Is it some physical entity which may have long since dissipated, eroded through the passage of time into oblivion? Or is it something a little more valuable, even if not tangible? Perhaps a life lesson, a moral conduct, a spiritual yearning, a holy ambition which endures eternal. And then ask yourself, what gifts are you imparting to your children? Is it all the transient stuff of which we can never get enough, though here today, gone tomorrow? Or is it something more meaningful, more substantial, that no matter what will always leave an indelible impression. Indeed, just as Hanukkah is the festival of lights, each beautiful child represents a ray of light in the way that they bring illumination into our homes and literally light up our lives. Let's remember that the Hanukkah lights are kindled by the shamash, a central candle. We as parents are that shamash. We are the central candle responsible for kindling the flames, and we do so by way of our own example because, always remember this, however much we're watching our children to see what they're doing with their lives, make no mistake about it, they're watching us to see what we're doing with ours. There were these two sisters who were spending their Hanukkah weekend at their grandparents', and at bedtime they're lying on their beds, reciting the Shema, their bedtime prayers, and suddenly the little sister starts to pray at the top of her lungs, I pray for a new Barbie doll house. I pray for a new Nintendo. I pray for a new iPhone. The older sister looks to her, why are you shouting like that? God isn't deaf, you know, and she says, I know, but Grandma is. Everyone has their own idea of what they want for their kids in life. But in our perpetual search and yearning for nachas, that Jewish word with no appropriate English translation, we must not go deaf to the calling of our 21st century. And that is to ensure that children receive a sound Jewish education which will fortify them to find their own inner strength, such that they'll be able to navigate the challenges of life and grow to be real sources of pride and beacons of light as productive and proud Jews out in the world. The most famous delicacy associated with Hanukkah is the delectable latke. A latke is essentially a potato pancake. Its shape is typically round. To be sure, it's more of a relatively modern-day innovation. After all, potatoes were not readily available on the continent for a long time. But the issue here isn't the latke per se, it's the ingredient, the oil, which of course cannot be consumed on its own. We eat the latke precisely because it requires deep frying in oil, which reminds us of the miracle of the oil that lasted in the temple menorah for 8 days, even as there was only enough for 1 day. Let's think about oil. Oil is integral to Jewish ritual, both in its content and its symbolism. Oil was used on the altar. Oil was used to anoint kings and priests. Oil, of course, was used in the menorah. We can talk about oil as being fattening or a waste of world resources, but where would Judaism be without oil? Oil is distilled essence. It's separate, hence it rises to the top. At the same time, it spreads about, thus permeating throughout. And that is the story of the Jew. That is the uniqueness of the Jew, rising to the top whilst spreading throughout, being a light onto the nations. And in that sense, the latke reminds us of our uniqueness as Jews and our special mission in this world. Hanukkah is about this spiritual victory. The Greeks had one primary objective, to assimilate the Jew into one hodgepodge of multicultural idealism. So I eat the latke because there are so many assaults on basic Jewish mores and principles today. Barriers are coming down and more people are scrambling over. We need the latke as a critical reminder of our paramount responsibility as Jews. Ask any Jew anywhere what he or she is most concerned about today, and they will invariably tell you anti-Semitism. On some level, nothing has changed. The threats of yesteryear are every bit alive and well, whether within governments, whether on university campuses, and countless other places besides. Latkes are filled with oil, which connotes anointing, royalty, priesthood, majesty. Oil, it's all about light, it's all about permeation, it's about maintaining our regal bearing of Jewish pride. You make a latke by taking a potato and grating it, thus reminding us how the life of the Jew through the ages may have been grated, shredded, torn apart. But did that get us down? No. If life gives you lemons, make lemonade. If life shreds your potato, make latkes. There was a farmer who had an old mule that fell into a deep, dry well and was braying loudly. And hearing his mule bray, he came to assess the situation. And he realizes the mule is old and heavy, the well itself is dry. Perhaps there's a simple solution. I'll summon together all of my neighbors and solve two problems at once. I'll fill the dry well and put the donkey out of its misery. And that's what he did. He summoned the various different neighbors to help him, piling shovelful of dirt after shovelful of dirt, falling on the mule's back. The mule becomes hysterical. But as the farmer and his neighbors continue shoveling and the dirt is hitting his back, a thought struck him. It suddenly dawned on him that every time a shovelful of dirt lands on his back, he should shake it off and step up. And that's what he did, blow after blow, shake it off and step up. Shake it off and step up, he repeated to encourage himself. No matter how painful the blows or how distressing the situation seemed, the old mule fought panic and just kept right on, shaking it off and stepping up. And it wasn't long before the old mule, battered and exhausted, stepped triumphantly over the wall of that well. What seemed likely to bury him actually blessed him, all because of the manner in which he handled his adversity. That's life. That's the story of the Jewish people from time immemorial, facing its problems and responding to them positively, refusing to give in to panic, bitterness, or self-pity. For 2,000 years, we've been enduring this exile, and yet we're still here to tell the tale. We, the Jewish people, are a collective affirmation of life. Our existence and our achievements are a living testimony to one of Judaism's greatest messages to humankind, the principled defeat of tragedy by the power of hope. The Latkes reminds us that we must put the message out to the world, a message of pride, of dignity, a message that declares loud and clear, Am Yisrael Chai, we the Jewish people have, are, and will live on forevermore. There is a wonderful game associated with Hanukkah. It's called dreidel. Dreidel is Yiddish for spinning top. The dreidel is a pointed four-sided top made of wood or plastic, which can be made to spin on its base. The origin of the dreidel, it is suggested, dates back to the very time of the Greek-Syrian rule over the Holy Land, which set off the Maccabean revolt that culminated in the Chanukkah miracle. Learning Torah was outlawed by the Greeks. It was determined a crime which was punishable by death. So the Jewish children resorted to hiding in caves in order to study, and if a Greek patrol would approach, the children would pull out their tops and pretend to be playing a game. By playing dreidel during the festival of Hanukkah, we are reminded of the courage of those brave children. Now, what are the rules of the game? Well, there are 4 Hebrew letters on each of the sides of the dreidel: Nun, Gimel, He, Shin. It's intended as an acronym for Nes Gadal Haya Sham. A great miracle happened there in reference to the Chanukkah miracle. Everyone contributes something to the pot, and each takes a turn spinning the dreidel. If it lands on a nun, you get nothing. On a shin, you have to pay into the pot. On the hay, you get half the pot, and if it lands on gimel, you've hit the jackpot and you take all. Then you repeat the process again. Now, you know, everything in life contains a lesson, and the dreidel would be no exception. So what lesson can we take from a spinning top? Well, for one thing, contrast it with the grugger, which is the noise-making spinning thing we wave on Purim when hearing Haman's name. Whereas with the grugger, the handle is at the bottom. On the dreidel, the handle is at the top. This reflects the variation in the way the miracle was manifest. On Purim, God weaved his tapestry, as it were, through the fabric of nature, and it was what appeared to be a string of coincidences that led to the salvation of the Jewish people. Thus, the handle of the grugger at the bottom, reflecting the miracles as they were expressed through nature down below. On Hanukkah, both the victory of the small group of Maccabees, as well as the miracle of the oil, they were open and obvious miracles. It was clear for one and all to behold. Hence, the handle is on the top, just as indeed God's munificence in heaven above was apparent to all. In life, we experience both. Sometimes the hand of God is perfectly obvious, and other times it may be less apparent. We might attribute certain things to just coincidence or luck, but remember, a coincidence is really just a miracle in which God chooses to remain anonymous. Or as Albert Einstein once put it, either everything is a miracle or nothing is. The other lesson of the dreidel is how the varied letters reflect the kaleidoscope of life. Sometimes we have gimel days. Everything is on an even keel. Everything is going our way. Life is good. We feel as if we've hit the jackpot. To the opposite end of the spectrum, we have shin days, where we feel we're always paying in, expending so much energy. We feel as if the world has turned against us. We're physically and emotionally depleted. There may be nun days where everything is simple, though hardly productive, and hay days, which for the most part are good with its occasional hiccups. The important thing to remember is that all of the letters make up Nes Gadol Hayasham, a big miracle happened there. In good times and in more challenging times, on average days or even not so average days, God is with us every step of the way. Don't attribute your successful days to your own prowess, and don't despair in the face of whatever challenges. Acknowledge the reality of God in every part of your daily experience, and always strive to be continuously productive throughout. These 4 letters, Nun Gimel He Shin, a great miracle happened there, makes up the numerical value of 358, the same numerical value of Mashiach. That remains our constant yearning. That indeed, just as God demonstrated great miracles by Yamim Hahem in those days, we should finally experience the ultimate miracle with the Messiah, with the coming of Mashiach Bizman Hazeh in our day. May we indeed merit this speedily. Amen.
If you like that video, hit the subscribe button and notification bell below for hours of the best Jewish content online.